What are the keys for Kansas taking down Fresno State, and what are some of the best player matchups in this one between the Jayhawks and the Bulldogs?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks, and thank you for making it your first listen every day. Thank you so much to the everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're going over our keys for Kansas to come out with a victory against Fresno State. We'll also get into our player matchups, players to watch, and we'll get to some FanDuel Friday where we try to cook up some, fun wagers on the Kansas game against Fresno State. Before we get into any of that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Football season's around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets now, because Futures Day is coming up as well on August 26th. Okay, let's start with this. Keys for Kansas to take down Fresno State. And again, thank you if you're an everydayer and already caught our matchups of the game, Fresno State Scouting Report episode from Thursday. If not, go check that out because it'll certainly help in regards to some of this. But I think KU wins the game if. All right, there's a question. KU wins if what? I think Jalon Daniels looks like Jalon Daniels. You know, what that basically means is, do you get a good version of Jalon Daniels? And that kind of is a big question for not just this game, it's for this season for KU. You know, for so many years, the question with Jalon wasn't what performance are you going to get? It's could he stay upright? Could he stay healthy? He stayed healthy last year. He played all 12 games. That was awesome to see. What wasn't awesome was the lack of cohesiveness, whatever you want to call it, with the Jeff Grimes offense, lack of, a little bit of rust at the beginning of the season, but we saw him start to look like that guy we were used to over those last 7 games. And the bigger sample size still for Jalon Daniels is more so that 5-game stretch that he started 2024 is the aberration more than the norm, because the bigger sample size is that Jalon has been one of the most electric quarterbacks in the conference and in the country. And I'm expecting him to have a big final season at Kansas. I think it starts now against Fresno State. And if you have a quarterback who, when he's, on his A game, can be one of the most electric quarterbacks in the conference in the country, you win a game like this over Fresno State, right? So from that perspective, if Jalon's on his game, you win the game. The flip side to that is he's not as much on his game, and you have a couple interceptions. You have 2-3 interceptions. You don't have that faith and that trust on those third down plays. And that's where you come up with a loss in this one, similar to what happened in the UNLV game at home a season ago. So if Jalon just looks like Jalon, you have him scrambling, picking up yardage there. He's making key third down passes. He's throwing downfield. He's hitting his receivers. Kansas wins this game. The next one, KU also, I think, wins this game if the defense has at least like a fine game against the run. I'm not saying they got to be the 1985 Chicago Bears against the run. You just can't really get torched. I shared that stat on the other episode yesterday about KU in the Lance Leipold era, that they're 15-4 when they give up 4.4 yards per carry or less. They're 7-24 when they give up more than that. And so, if you give up 4.3 yards per carry in this game, that's not like a shutdown game for your defense. It's a solid game. It's a good game for your run defense. But even then, maybe if you do venture into that right above that number at 4.6, 4.7, like you still might be okay. Maybe in this game, we'll wait and see. But just don't get torched, right? Fresno State wants to be a team that pounds the rock. Fresno State wants to be a team that runs the football. They've got a good running back in Donaldson. It's one of those situations where just don't let them take over the game. If you can just make this a net neutral or kind of an average thing, you should be okay. They win the game controlling the time, controlling the clock, controlling the possession, and grinding you down, running the football again, kind of similar to what UNLV did a season ago. Obviously, turnovers would be the other one. KU wins the game if they avoid any turnovers, or if they're plus in the turnover department, or if they're even. I feel good about it in the turnover department, right? You're 12-point favorites, 12.5-point favorites. If you can just be even in the turnover department, you feel good about that. When you're -1, you're -2, then you start getting into some of the issues they had last year. So just be clean, and that's always a little more difficult in the first game of the season. You're trying to catch back up to game speed and playing real games, and all that stuff. But be locked in and avoid those turnovers, because that one silly turnover at the beginning of the game that you think is, okay, we have plenty of time to get them, it could end up being the difference in the end. We saw how close some of these games can be for KU a season ago. Now, let's take this a step further. KU covers if, right? There's a difference between KU winning 3-7 points. And we talked about on yesterday's episode some of Fresno State's recent games against Power 4, Power 5 opponents, that they played a lot of these teams really tough and really close. And so you probably have that same expectation for this game against Kansas. So how does Kansas find a way to win this game by 14 points, by 17 points, by 21 points? Well, I think if they're able to dominate the explosive play category, that would certainly help. And how does that happen for Kansas? Of course, if Daniel Highshaw, gets a big run, or Jalon Daniels has a big scramble, I think a majority of those explosive plays for Kansas would have to come from one of, if not both, of Emmanuel, Henderson, and Cam Pickett. Like, can they bust through on maybe a play that's a simple bubble screen or slant route to one of those guys that they make some extra guys miss, and that special play, gets you over the edge, where you're getting those quick points, you're getting those easier drives where you don't have to labor for 12, 15 plays to score a touchdown. And on the flip side of it, if you're limiting Fresno State from hitting those explosive plays, it's going to be harder for them to put up, big points. And they are going to be comfortable trying to grind their way down the field. Again, that's kind of the identity that they're going to want to provide. But I think the idea for KU is that, hey, if KU feels good about their D-line, which I certainly do, and if you feel good about the D-line and you're the Power 4 team and they're not, if they want to play a grinded out style, you should at different points be able to win that war over the line of scrimmage and be able to push them back in a real way, that if that's the way they want to play, you should be able to kind of slow that down. So then it kind of becomes about, can they hit those explosive plays to counter that and really open up the game in a real way? That is where kind of the issue would arrive. So dominate the explosive play category. I think that would go a big, long way, especially you get a long touchdown or two. That goes a long way in you covering the spread. And going back to what I was saying about the defensive line, I think that's the other one. KU covers the spread here if the defensive line dominates for KU. It's a Fresno State offensive line that lost 3 offensive linemen from last year's team. They do have a really good one back who's playing center now, but the offensive tackles are a bit of questions for them. They've got young play. I mean, they're starting a true freshman left tackle who's a gigantic dude. He's a nearby local recruit. So he could be a diamond in the rough obviously if he's a true freshman starting, he clearly has some talent, but I think back to a guy like Bryce Cabledew. Bryce Cabledew ended up being an NFL draft pick for KU. He was awesome last year for Kansas. He was really good the year prior to that too. Took some time for him to develop, and he was thrown into the fire in that 2020 season. If you remember that 2020 KU football offensive line, one of the worst that we've ever seen. Linemen a lot of times need time, and so that kind of tells me that maybe Fresno State a little desperate. Now maybe he's just this otherworldly player, and he's 6'7", 320. Fresno doesn't see this very often, but that tells me that maybe there are some questions on the offensive line. Again, you feel good about KU's defensive tackle room. I feel good about their defensive end room. I like their defensive line, but if you can't take advantage of this game, then maybe we're going to be reconsidering some of that stuff. If you want to live up to the hype, go dominate this game, right? Go dominate the freshman left tackle, who again might turn out to be an absolute stud, but in the first game of his career for an 82 rated 3-star, those guys typically aren't as ready as some other players. Again, Bryce Cabledew, a perfect example. If you get Bryce Cabledew last year, tough to get by him. You get Bryce Cabledew 5 years ago, that was a little bit easier of a task. So take advantage of this for Kansas, dominate the game there. And for a team that wants to run the football, if you stuff them running the ball, that's going to take away a huge identity from what they want to do. And then also that puts them in more passing situations where, EJ Warner has been able to throw the ball around the field. He's got a good arm and everything, but he does have some interceptions in his past. And if you're getting in more of those opportunities, do you get a couple picks to open up the game and allow you to cover that spread? And then the last one here is just clean football. KU covers this game if they're clean football. What I was talking about, the turnovers earlier, if this is something where KU is even, I feel good about them winning. But if you want to, cover the spread, you got to play clean. Not a bunch of penalties. You can't have 8-10 penalties. You can't have some of those turnovers yourself. You can't have the special teams mistakes. You got to just play a clean football game, which is easier said than done in the first game of the season. All right, let's get to players to watch, player matchups of the game, and then we'll finish up with FanDuel Friday. This is Locked on Jayhawks. This episode of LOJ is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day. It's a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel's giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week one even kicks off, this is your moment. You can get action on the KU Fresno State game. We're going to go over some of this later in the show, but KU 12.5 point favorites. You can get Emmanuel Henderson or Cam Pickett at plus odds to score a touchdown. You can get Daniel Highshaw at over plus odds to score 2 touchdowns in the game. You think you can score 3 touchdowns? You can get it like 7-1 over at FanDuel if he's just going to have a party in the end zone for the game. So visit the FanDuel app today. Start planning your future bets now because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel. Play your game. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Don't forget you make Locked On College Football your second listen every day. Really get you ready for all the week 0 action. Obviously, K-State, Iowa State's a big one in the Big 12. I mean, that could very well eliminate one of the teams from making the Big 12 title game. And obviously, KU plays both teams, so be keeping an eye on that one over in is it Ireland or Scotland they're playing it? Regardless, I think it's Ireland. Okay, players to watch for Kansas against Fresno State. Let's start with our players to watch for Kansas. Offensive side of the ball, going to start with Jalon Daniels. Sometimes I veer away from picking the quarterback in these things because it's just so obvious. The quarterback has so much control of every football game in general. But it becomes more of a storyline this year when we go back to what we talked about at the beginning. What Jalon Daniels are you going to get? Are you going to get the healthy Jalon Daniels? Are you going to get the injured Jalon Daniels? You're going to get the first 5 games of last year, Jalon Daniels. You're going to get the last 7 games. You're going to get 2022. You're going to get 2023. What are you going to get? If you get the good version of Jalon Daniels, you have one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And I think they are going to get the better version of him. I think those first 5 games of the season last year, some of the variables that led to that happening, Jeff Grimes, offensive coordinator, he's no longer here. An offensive coordinator you feel comfortable with, Jim Zabrowski, boom. Matt Lubick's back. That's great. Getting to throw to the receivers in summer and fall camp, like that was something that injury stuff for either him and or the receivers led to it not happening as much. I think that rust was there at the beginning of last season. I don't really think it's there this season. So I think he's set up to do those things this year. But yeah, it is going to be interesting what we see this year. And especially, this is year 6. This is his last year. You do have another year under your belt of experience. Can you take another step up? Like that's something we honestly haven't really been talking about. It's more so just been which guy are you going to get? What if he does take a step forward in that extra season, similar to how we've seen with some guys be able to do that? So that'll be interesting. And then I guess I'll do a slashy here. We're doing 2 on offense, 2 on defense for both. I'm gonna cheat. Emmanuel Henderson / Cam Pickett. I don't know which one is going to end up being like Jalen's favorite target. The closer we get to game time, the more I'm kind of thinking it's going to be Cam Pickett, that he kind of fills that Luke Grimm role, who he always had, Jalon always had such a great connection with. But I really want to see Emmanuel Henderson, man. He's explosive. I think he's going to have a huge season for KU. I think both guys are going to have strong seasons for KU from the receiver position. And as you look at Fresno State, they have a really good secondary. They've got a good back end. So those guys are really going to have to work for their wins in this one. Defensive side of the ball for KU, we're going to go Bengali Kamara. This is an overhauled unit for the KU linebacker core, one that lost a lot of production. J.B. Brown was a really good player for KU for the past couple of years. Better, pass rusher and run defender than he was in coverage necessarily. With Cornell Wheeler, he was having a great start to last year and was really solid in kind of a rotational role the year before. But then he suffered that injury. I think it was the West Virginia game, kind of came back and played through it, and he just was not the same guy after playing through it. Tyrone Berryhill had some struggles, and so you ended up with the KU linebacking core leaving some to be desired. You go out this year, you bring in 3 transfers, big-time transfers. Trey Lathan starting at West Virginia. Joseph Sipp was an all-MAC player at Bowling Green, and maybe the leader of this is Bengali Kamara, who 2 years ago when he was at Pitt was a really productive player for a couple seasons with a Panthers defense that's led by Pat Narduzzi, who really, puts emphasis on the defensive side of the ball. It's an overhauled unit. He's a really athletic linebacker, maybe not as much of a thumper as a guy like J.B. Brown, but really athletic player. I want to see what that looks like in this game against Fresno State, and if this can be an overhauled unit, but also something we touched on yesterday's episode. E.J. Warner last season threw 9 interceptions over the middle third of the field. And so you automatically look to guys like linebackers and safeties to say, you might get a chance in this game to make a play and get an interception. I look at an athletic linebacker like Bengali Kamara, who could be, if you're looking at KU playing sets on passing downs with a 5th or maybe even a 6th defensive back, Kamara might be the linebacker that stays on the field because he is an athletic linebacker. Maybe it's Lathan. Maybe you sub in a guy like John Kamara and just get as athletic as possible. But If it is Kamara, I think even regardless whether it's not, I want to see this overhauled unit for KU, and he's kind of the leader of that. And then the other one's Austin Alexander. I am really interested to see how Jalen Todd plays, but we got to see him a little bit last year, and we saw some fun flashes. We haven't seen Austin Alexander, who redshirted a season ago after coming in as I forget if it was a very high-end 3-star, low-end 4-star recruit, but like very well thought of, and so much so that he earns the start on the depth chart as just a redshirt freshman. I really want to see what he can provide, because could this version of a sophomore Jalen Todd and freshman Austin Alexander, could it be the new version of Kobe and Mello in terms of, Kobe and Mello were both playing when they were underclassmen at KU too. So maybe it's not as experienced. Maybe you have a few more coverage busts this year, but certainly I think the talent is still going to be there in that back room. Now, players to watch from Fresno State. Offensively, we're going to go with Bryson Donaldson. He was a second-team All-Mountain West pick by Phil Steele. Only 462 rushing yards. That's solid, but 6.0 yards per carry. He was the backup last season. He'll be in a bigger role this year. He's the starter. It's a run-first offense. They want to grind their way down the field, really have to tackle well, which is always tougher in that first game of the season. He averaged 4.55 yards per carry after contact last season. For what it's worth, Devin Neal was 3.7. So that shows you how good of a running back this kid is, especially after contact. Now, Neal did a lot of his work with his vision and not letting guys make contact with him before he got there. So it is a little bit different in what they did. But yeah, point being, Donaldson is a really good running back. KU's going to have to work hard to bottle him up. Josiah Freeman, even though they lost their top 3 receivers, Freeman probably would have been one of the team's top 3 receivers last season. He just had an injury. He's first team All-Mountain West by Phil Steele. He had 8 catches last year. Again, it was 3 games, and then I think he got hurt. But the year before, 245 yards. He had a 72 PFF grade in his 76 snaps last year, 68 in the year before, so solid numbers there. And in 2023, he did his best work over the middle of the field as kind of an intermediate area player, and also left or right over the middle. So somebody who really works in those intermediate zones. And, he's a more experienced player than what KU has in the back end, so he'll definitely be somebody to watch there. Defensive side of the ball for Fresno State, cornerback Alzillian Hamilton, who has an amazing name, Alzillian. He might be making Alzillion bucks in the NFL soon. Second team All-Mountain West on Phil Steele. The media poll, the official one for the Mountain West, has him on the first team for the preseason. He had a 79.7 Pro Football Focus grade last year, including a 79 grade in coverage. Very good cover corner for Fresno State. He gave up just a 54% completion rate, and he had just 1 penalty. So very good corner. Is he going to draw Emmanuel Henderson? Is he going to draw Cam Pickett? Maybe this goes back to the idea, maybe it's going to be Pickett that goes off, because if Pickett's playing the slot and Hamilton's on the outside and that's Henderson, maybe, you have to go away from him a little bit more, but certainly a player to watch. And then on the defensive line, Corey Freeman, who interestingly enough is actually listed as an or on their depth chart. But he's a very talented player, 6'4", 250-pound senior who was the former number 1 recruit to USC, second team All-Mountain West by Phil Steele. He had 24 tackles, 3 sacks, and 3 forced fumbles last year in 320 snaps. 20 pressures is a good amount there. Figures to play a bigger role, although again, or maybe he just ends up being a pass rush specialist, but certainly a very talented player who, again, on 24/7 Sports was listed as the number 3 overall recruit in the country. Coming into USC, and now he's on, I think, year 5, had kind of his best year last year. You'd think gets a little better this year. Our player matchups of the game. Kansas offensive tackles versus Corey Foreman. Foreman was, again, a 100 rated recruit in high school by 24/7 Sports. He's now 5th-year senior, 38 games played career, 49 tackles, 10 TFLs, 5.5 sacks. And again, most of that came last year, his best year. We'll see how much he plays, but he's a very talented player that you would think in a game like this, if you're going to get the best version of him, that makes him even more dangerous. And I don't know if they're going to use him more on the left or right side. Last year, he played kind of left outside linebacker and right outside linebacker. It was kind of game to game. I don't know what the defense is going to look like now for them, if it's going to be a 3 or 4 down front, if he's going to be outside linebacker or defensive end. But whether it's against Calvin Clements, who's a new starting left tackle for you, but a very talented one for KU, or against Enrique Cruz, who got named your starter at right tackle on Hawk Talk with Lance Leipold this week, who's a more experienced player from Syracuse, those are 2 new tackles for KU, and it's against a very talented player. So this should be very intriguing on that matchup. And maybe do we see Nolan Gorsica rotate in for Cruz, and how does that look as well? Now, I think the other player matchup, the easy one would be the KU defensive ends against, in the same way we picked here, against a true freshman left tackle for Fresno State. but I don't want to pick that one because that is one that, like, if we're being quite frankly, KU needs to win that matchup. You're playing a true freshman. You're Kansas against Fresno State. Win that matchup against the true freshman, right? So I think the better overall matchup is KU's defensive tackles against Fresno State offensive lineman and center Jacob Spomer. We've talked about the KU defensive tackles being the strength of the defense. Well, Spomer is a really good offensive lineman for the Bulldogs. He actually played left tackle last year for 5 games. He was coming back from an ACL injury, so he got back for the second half of the season. And he's moving from left tackle to center. He had 254 snaps last year, so a bit of a smaller sample size, but 85.4 PFF grade, 89 in pass block, 81 in run block, one of the best centers for a 5-game stretch in the country last year. He had just 1 penalty. He had basically a 99% pass rush win rate. And that's at left tackle. Now he's playing center. Honestly, I'm not even sure why did they move him to center from left tackle. Maybe it was health related. I don't know, whatever. But now you have basically Fresno State's best offensive lineman against KU's biggest defensive strength on the D-line. Is DJ Withers, is Tommy Dunn, is Blake Harrell. Was one of those 3 going to break out to being like an all Big 12 level lineman? They've got a bunch of depth there. They've got a bunch of quality players. They go about 5-6 deep, depending on the health and availability of Gage Keys. That should be a really fun matchup on the interior, especially when you're looking at Fresno State wants to control the clock. They want to run the ball. No better way to do that than over the middle of that offensive line. All right, let's finish up here. FanDuel Friday. What are some of the things we're keeping an eye on for the KU Fresno State game next? This episode of the show is brought to you by Rougiette. You've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis, maybe even tried them, but if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rougiette Ready. Rougiette Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rougiette's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. You can even read real customer reviews on their site. It's helping a lot of people feel more confident and present in the moment. Head to Rougiette.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege to get 15% off today. That's Rougiette.com, Rougiet.com/LockedOnCollege. Use promo code LockedOnCollege for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rougiette website for full safety information. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Again, check out Locked On College Football to get you ready for all the Week 0 action. All right, it's time for our FanDuel Friday. We're going to take a look at the line for the KU Fresno State game. It is 12.5. It actually, I think, opened at 13.5, so that means some money is coming in on Fresno State. So to be clear, I'm picking Kansas to win this game straight up. I think I would be picking Fresno State with the spread, though. I went over on yesterday's show. A lot of these games that Fresno plays against Power 4 opponents, they're losing by a touchdown. They're losing by 3. They're winning some of these games on the road, going to overtime. I think it ends up being within 10 points, probably within a touchdown. Like off the top of my head, I'm kind of thinking like a 31-24 type game. So Fresno with the spread, but I'm picking KU for the game. The over-under is 50.5. So I guess if I said 31-24, that would be over. So I'm so tempted to take the under, though. I know I just said the score, because if you think about Fresno State being a ball control offense, that runs the clock. And if you think the KU defense is going to be better, then take the under. But Fresno State also being such a good pass defense, that could limit the explosivity for KU football. I don't know. I'll just go with the original score prediction. 31-24 would give you to the over. So we'll just go with the slight over on that one. Favorite KU prop bets. So this is interesting. There's been 25 career games for Jalon Daniels where he has 20 or more pass attempts. The reason I took that sample is I would think he's going to have 20 or more pass attempts in this game against Fresno State. And of those 25 games, he's gone over 200 yards in 15 of them. So a 60% clip. The over-under for his passing yards is 200.5. So if you're saying that you're getting, around a coin flip of him going over 200, he does that more often than not. You can also, if you want to get spicy with it, he has 15 career games with 200 or more passing yards, and of those 15, 11, he has 225 or more. So that's, closer to 70%. You can get him to have 225 plus passing yards on FanDuel plus 152 if you want to get crazy. But I like the 200. Even though Fresno State has the good defense, because of the fact that I do think it'll be a little bit closer game, it's going to put pressure and keep pressure on KU to keep throwing the ball, I think, in the end. I'm not really touching any of the receiver props. Again, I don't know who Alzalian Hamilton is going to be guarding. We don't really know who Jalon Daniels is going to have that best connection with, but I do find into Cam Pickett's over-unders 39.5. It does feel a little low to me. We'll exploit that, though, in our next part of this. I also don't want to touch the rushing ones yet for KU because we don't know how good the KU offensive line revamped is going to be, and Fresno could be kind of feisty stopping the run. So I'm not going to take the Daniel Highshaw like over whatever it is, like 80-something rushing yards or one of the rushing touchdown ones. I kind of want to get a better feel in this first game. Favorite KU prop parlay. If you want to do a little fun parlay here, you can get Deshaun Hanukkah alt yards at 10 or more yards. Right? That'd basically be one catch, maybe two, depending on how much he gets. You combine that with Cam Pickett to get 25 or more yards, again, an alt line. Jalon Daniels get 150 plus passing, an alt line, a little safer there. And a Daniel Highshaw anytime touchdown. You combine those four, and it ends up being plus 225 odds overall over at FanDuel. Now, if we're looking out around the rest of the country, week 0, not a ton of other games going on, but it's football. Not going to complain. I kind of like K-State money line against Iowa State. I think Iowa State's going to take kind of a step back this year, but if you don't want to bet that one, I don't blame you. How about we just, Stanford, Hawaii are playing the over-unders 50.5. Why not take the over on that one? Frank Reich is now the head coach for Stanford. You would think a former NFL offensive coordinator, quarterback, and head coach can draw up some good offensive schemes. You think of Hawaii always being this Hawaii actually has kind of a low-key good defensive line, so that's a little scary. But Hawaii, you think of being this air raid offense, and I think Timmy Chang, their former record-breaking quarterback, is the coach. I don't know, late night game in Hawaii. Why would you not want to take the points? So anyway, that is our FanDuel Friday for this week, and we'll be back at you on Saturday night to break down whatever happens between KU and Fresno State. It is football season. We are here. Congrats, everybody. We made it. Can't wait to see what happens. Hopefully good stuff. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. See you next time with LOJ.